Hello, everyone. This is Sherry Greenhouse, Managing Partner of CRM Exchange, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webcast, Understanding the Customer Journey, What to Measure and Why, presented by Transera. This webcast is being recorded. We'll make sure we send you a link where you can listen to this event again, and of course, you're always welcome to share the webcast with others in your organization. And I know many of you are going to want the slides. It's a great presentation. In order to get the slides, at the end of the presentation, a survey will come up in a separate link, and one of those questions will ask if you'd like the slides. If you want that copy, place a check, and we'll make sure you do get that check. We are going to have a Q&A session at the very end of the presentation. But just so you don't forget your question, as the presentation's progressing, look at your console. You'll see the panelists and your own name only. You'll see chat, and right under that, Q&A. Q&A is where you're going to want to put your questions. If you find you have any technical issues, for those that are on streaming, occasionally streaming will stop for a little bit. That's perfectly normal, but if you can't hear for a while or the slides aren't advancing, that's where you're going to use chat, and you're going to select where it says to your WebEx producer, and she will help you right away. So now I'd like to introduce your presenter for today, Arnab Mishra, Vice President, Products and Solutions for Transera. Arnab leads product management, product marketing, program management, and strategic alliances for Transera. Prior to joining Transera, he worked at Genesys, where he led the definition and positioning of Genesys core communications platform offerings and spearheaded the launch of the Genesys Voice platform, making it the leading next-generation voice self-service platform globally. He's held marketing and business development roles at Transera and worked as a venture capital investor in the Beacon Group. He holds an MBA from Harvard Business School and a BS in economics from the Wharton School at University of Pennsylvania, and it is my pleasure to turn this webcast over to Arnab.
Great. Thanks, Sherry. Appreciate you doing that, and thanks everyone who's joining the webinar today. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to join today's event. What we're going to spend today talking about, and I'll probably take the next 30 to 40 minutes or so, kind of walking through something that we at Transera call the customer journey. And so, many of the folks on the call today probably work in sort of customer service, contact center parts of their businesses. And we know the ultimate goal of any contact center is to optimize the experience for each customer that contacts the enterprise. And so, that has been the ultimate goal of contact centers for a long time, and there have been great advances towards that. And we at Transera have been focused on this problem for a while and have been looking at where are there areas of gaps that exist today in reaching that end goal. And what we've realized is that there are a robust amount of data that contact centers capture each and every day. And one of the challenges that exists out there today is how do you actually leverage that data and gain insights from that data. And so we as a company have been very focused on this, and I think today we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the things that we've learned and some of the frameworks that we think are interesting in terms of couching the problem and thinking about solutions to the problem that lead to actual benefit for the enterprise. So from an agenda perspective, what we thought we would do is start a little bit with some grounding and some context. So Aberdeen Group has done a great amount of research on this topic, and so we thought we'd share some of their findings and some statistics on how enterprises are utilizing customer data today. And then really spend most of the discussion around, well, how do you unlock the value of that data that already exists in a contact center and in an enterprise, and how do you get actionable insights from that data so you can optimize the experience of each customer as they come in and contact your enterprise. And then hopefully we'll have some time at the end for Q&A, and very interested in hearing everyone's questions and hoping we get a chance to address them. So, given that this is a webinar about data, we thought it would be apropos to start with some statistics and some numbers based on this research that Aberdeen Group has done. So one of the first things that jumps out from their research is that 93% of companies today are not completely satisfied with their use of customer data. And this is, I think a telling statistic in and of itself, because if you think about all of the investments that have gone into contact centers and into enterprises in general over the last 15 to 20 years around capturing data, around analytics tools, around reporting tools, data visualization tools, it's really interesting that 93% of companies still say, well, we're not completely satisfied with how we're using our customer data. And so one could then think, well, maybe it's because they don't have the right data, or they don't have the data they need, or what's the root cause of that problem? And so Aberdeen asked the next question, and what they found was that 85% of companies actually feel like they have the data that they need, and that they've implemented the systems they need to capture the data, but what they're struggling with is in generating insights. And so that, these two statistics, I think in a nutshell, sort of lays out the state of the world with regards to leveraging the data captured by the enterprise and the contact center in enhancing the customer experience and enhancing how customers are managed on a day-to-day basis. So the next piece of research that Aberdeen did was, they said, well, given that this is the state of the world, what is it that's inhibiting enterprises from actually gaining the insights they need? And 70% of the respondents said one, two, or both of these things. They said that they lacked integration between the systems that they used in their customer care activities. And this is going to be a core point that we'll talk about throughout the webinar. And this lack of integration leads to a number of different challenges, operational challenges and business challenges as a result. And the second is they couldn't really bring the data that they had to bear at the time customers were contacting them. So they couldn't figure out, where the customer was in their interaction life cycle. They couldn't really figure out what the customer wanted, and they couldn't really recognize who the customer was. And so 70% of the respondents were saying that these two challenges were the top challenges that they were facing, and that led them to being part of that group of 93% of folks that weren't completely satisfied with how they were leveraging their customer data. The last set of statistics that we'll share here from the study that I think kind of puts an exclamation point on this phenomenon is Aberdeen then went and looked at, well, let's look at the companies that are doing the best job of leveraging customer data. And I think when they say best in class, this is really the top 20% of companies in the survey, and compare them to the rest of the respondents in the survey. And what they found was that the best in class companies far outperformed their peers. And the numbers here are actually quite staggering. If you look at revenue growth as one metric, these companies were growing 6 times faster than their peers. If you look at customer retention, their customer retention score was 50 to 60% higher. You look at upsell and cross-sell revenue, they're doing 3.5 times better than their peers. And so when you think about this problem around customer data, leveraging customer data and getting insights out of the data, the companies that are doing the best at leveraging the data they have today are ones that are enjoying significant business benefits. And so you look at a slide like this and you start to ask yourself, is this something that companies can afford not to do, frankly? And should this be something that should be a strategic imperative or a higher priority imperative for most enterprises? Okay, so with that as context, I think what we want to spend the rest of our time here doing is really talking about the problem and really diving into what is the environment in which this problem exists. So if you look at a contact center, one of the great things about contact centers is they're one of the most instrumented and technically advanced parts of any enterprise. And over the last 20 or so years, a number of great technology applications have been invented and deployed and taken to market that really help contact centers operate in very efficient and functional manners. And so there's the classic systems that everyone probably knows about and has deployed in their contact centers, the IVR system, the ACD system, and the CRM system. And then over time, additional systems have come up. So as we live in a world now that's a multi-channel world, there's obviously email, chat, social, and mobile, increasingly mobile. There's order entry systems for folks that are taking orders or processing orders in their contact centers. There's all of the systems around what they call workforce optimization, which is speech analytics and workforce management and quality management. And then there's obviously predictive dialing for outbound scenarios or notification applications that are outbound notification applications. And as each one of these applications has been deployed in contact centers, what's happened is that they've been chained together from an interaction workflow together. So interactions that happen in the contact center typically touch two or more of these systems, and each of these systems is actually very good at logging the events and the data that are relevant to its purpose in life. So it knows about its world, but obviously because it lives in a silo specific to the functionality it provides, it doesn't know a lot about the systems around it and doesn't have sort of that end-to-end view. And so what the phenomenon that creates is you end up with these very complex environments that have a high degree of functionality, but the data generated by these environments is disjoint and siloed and stuck in the application silos that each one of these applications represent. And so what we've found is if you can actually pull the data together in an intelligent way and stitch the data together, and we'll talk about stitching of data later in the presentation, you can pull that data into the cloud and bring it together to bear for analytics purposes. The insights are phenomenal. And frankly, the insights are everywhere. And we espouse a view that the data will start talking to you instead of you having to manipulate the data. And so as we've done work with a number of customers around this concept and leveraging some of the solutions that are out there, what we found is that you can learn a variety of things. So some of the examples up on these slides are ones that we think have been fairly high value. So one is identifying customer behavior patterns that predict certain outcomes. If you can actually follow a customer through their journey and the life cycle they're following, and you can look at these across many customers, you can start to predict which outcomes will happen from which journeys, and you may be able to intercept the journey in the middle and accelerate that outcome, or if it's a negative outcome, turn it into a positive outcome. The other thing is identifying the right resource to handle a particular type of customer or issue. And so this is the classic problem of how do I connect a customer with an answering resource, an agent, an automated system, whatever it is, that's the right resource to handle the reason for which they're contacting me. And if you can look at a number of interactions across all the data available across your systems, you can start to see the patterns of which answering resources, how the performance is for each answering resource for each customer type in each interaction type. And then you can make what is today an ad hoc process of the ideal match into a more predictable process. The other thing is estimating the lifetime value of a customer based on the behavior of similar customers. So if you can pull all this data together and look at customer behavior over a long period of time and estimate and draw and conclude what the lifetime value is of those customers, as new customers get acquired and as you start observing their behavior, you can start estimating their lifetime value. And that's extremely important because you can then take that data and decide how do I want to treat that customer based on what I believe their lifetime customer value will be. And then other things are around, promotions and offers. And so, how do you know when to promote a product to a particular customer for the best business benefit? When do you know which offers are actually helping increase conversion rates and order values? And all of this information exists in contact centers today. And all of this information is there ready to be utilized. The challenge that exists today is they're stuck in those silos, and so how do you actually pull the data together in order to understand when the optimal time is to promote a certain product, when is the optimal time to make a certain offer. And then the last case that we tend to see a lot is around proactive service and support. If you have the ability to look at the data and see a customer that was contacting you multiple times for a certain issue, and you knew that the issue was not getting resolved, would it be great to be able to reach out to that customer and be able to deal with their issue in a satisfactory manner instead of having them contact you again. In today's world, it's not just if customers are having poor experiences with the enterprise, it's not just friends and family that end up finding out. We obviously know that customers today are empowered with social media tools like Twitter and Facebook, and it ends up, it always has the potential to be a broader phenomenon that has the potential to go viral. And so obviously, nipping these things in the bud are important, and the only real way to do that is to have the data at your fingertips to know which customers need that kind of proactive support and proactive touch in order to stop what might be a train wreck in the making. Okay, so with that being said, we we've been thinking a lot about, so the data is there. How do we think about and organize the data in a way that will allow for the insights that are necessary to enhance the customer experience? And so what we've realized, after looking at all the systems that are out there and the different types of systems, is that there is sort of a natural hierarchy here from a data perspective. And so most contact centers today, and I'll talk about these in detail in the following slides, most contact centers today live at the events and transactions level. So the great thing about, the contact center systems that are out there today is they're very good and very well instrumented at logging events. So they log everything that happens in that system relative to the interactions and the contacts that system is processing. And that event data is a very rich stream of data that typically gets translated into transactions. And the transactional data is what folks that manage contact centers use for reporting purposes. So when you get a report out of your IVR system or your ACD system or your CRM system or your quality management system, what you're actually looking at is a set of events that have been aggregated, summed, averaged, whatever the case might be, into transactional data that you can then use to get visibility into what's happening in that operational system. Now those two layers are great from an operational perspective, but what you actually need to do if you want to understand the customer perspective in terms of these experiences and what they're experiencing when they contact your contact center, you have to be able to bring that data together. You have to be able to take the transactional data and stitch it into what we call interactions. And so interactions are really the end-to-end view of the data across the operational systems. And then if you can look at these interactions and stack them together and say, these sets of interactions were all for the same purpose, you have engagements. Because from a customer perspective, they don't really care about the systems that are in your contact center. They don't really care about how they're hopping from one system to the other. They have problems or issues that they need to get solved with the enterprise, and that's the perspective they're taking from where they sit. And so interactions are important in capturing that. And engagements are important, frankly, from a business perspective to understand, what is it that's happening in my contact center? Why are folks contacting me? And how often are they doing it, and what channels are they using to make those contacts? And that gives you that engagement data set. And then lastly, there's the journey. And the journey is a long-tailed phenomenon around multiple interactions and engagements that a customer will make with an enterprise over the life of their relationship with the enterprise. And that's frankly where we'll talk about big data here in a little bit, but that's where big data starts to matter because, as you think about keeping a repository of all this data and all of these engagements to really be able to map out the journey and the critical points in that customer relationship that were part of that journey, you need to have the ability to keep a very large and robust repository of data against which you can do your analysis. So let's talk about each one of these, specifically, so folks can walk away with a deeper understanding of this data hierarchy. So what are events? So events are what we call discrete facts, and they're extremely important in the data hierarchy itself, but by themselves they have limited value. So think of these discrete facts, across the different systems. So in an IVR system, it could be something like, a customer, selecting a menu option, so hitting 1 for service or 2 for a bill payment option. It could be an utterance in a speech recognition application. In a web chat, in a chat environment, it could be an entry into a text entry into a chat stream. Sending in an email response, it could be an email that was sent or a response that was sent back. Or in a voice world, or even in a multimedia world, it could be a routing decision made by an ACD. These are all discrete events that happen in each one of these systems, and most contact center systems today log these events and keep that data because they use it eventually for reporting purposes. And it's frankly on this base of events that the data hierarchy gets built, and it's why there's so much value and insight that can be drawn out of the data that exists in the contact center today. So let's talk about transactions. Well, transactions are really a set of events that are grouped together logically because it's related to a single contact, but these transactions live within each application silo. So an IVR system will provide you transaction data, which is really the set of events, the set of touchtone keys that were pressed, or the set of speech interactions that happened for a specific contact, and it'll provide you reporting based on that transactional data. Similarly, we do work where many of our customers are big on the website, and they do a lot of web work with their websites. The same thing happens on the web, where a customer comes in and looks at a set of web pages. There's a set of clicks that get tracked. They may be filling out a web form or providing some level of input. And all of that is transactional data, event-level data that gets aggregated into transactional data from the application that's managing the website. And then clearly on the traditional voice side, there's always the ability within an ACD, for example, when a customer gets routed to a queue and then queues in that queue and then gets distributed to an agent, there's a set of events that the ACD captures which gets aggregated into a transaction. The key thing to remember about transactions is they're siloed to that system. So transactions live within that application silo, and rarely, I mean, there are some examples of data passing from one silo to the next and getting embedded in transactional data, but it's not the norm. In most cases, transactional data sits within these application silos. So then that takes us to the next level, and this is, when we talk about interactions, this is really the new layer of the data hierarchy from where you can generate insights. And so interactions are the end-to-end of transactions across a single contact. So if you take a classic example of an interaction workflow, and I'll use a voice call for this example, typically when a customer calls a contact center, they hit an IVR system. And then in that IVR system, the IVR is typically capturing some data about the customer in terms of maybe who they are or what their intent is or what they're looking to do. And in certain cases, the IVR tries to complete that call in self-service, but generally, 70-80% of calls across the contact center don't get completed in self-service, and so you end up having the IVR system transfer the call to an ACD system. The ACD system at that point takes whatever data it can from the IVR. It might do its own prompting and menuing, and it'll route the call to a queue. From that point, the call will sit in queue until it's ready to be distributed to an agent. At which point the call gets sent to an agent, and the agent will start interacting with the customer, and you'll probably have a recording session that's recording the call at that point for quality purposes or speech analytics purposes. And once the agent gets a sense for what the customer is looking for, they will start interacting with a CRM system, and that CRM system will then get data inputted into it. The agent will be pulling certain data elements from the CRM system to handle the customer's issue. So if you think about this workflow in its entirety, there are 3 or 4 systems that are involved in the workflow. And each one of these systems is capturing data specific to its role in the workflow. But each system knows very little about the other systems. The IVR system doesn't know that there's a CRM system at the tail end of the call in which disposition information is being put in or the business outcome information is being put in. Similarly, the quality management system doesn't necessarily know that the ACD system took a set of decisions with regards to how the call was routed. And so if you think about the interaction, it's really the customer's view of the experience. Right? The customer went through these steps. The customer actually probably isn't sensitive to the fact that they hit an IVR system and then were sent to an ACD system and then the agent was using a CRM system, and all the while a quality management system in the background was recording the call. They're not sensitive to that, but they know that this was the end-to-end experience they had. So if you think about it from a contact center perspective, and if the real goal is we need to understand the experience our customers are having from their perspective, you have to think about pulling this data together across these systems for each contact. And that's really what an interaction is. An interaction is this aggregation, this intelligent aggregation of data across these systems for each contact that traverses that goes to the contact center. And so the next level up in the hierarchy is engagements. So interactions today, by themselves hold a lot of data because it stitches together all of the pieces of the workflow and provides an end-to-end view. And when you stack these interactions on top of each other in an interaction repository, you can do some very interesting analytics against it. Engagements are intelligent segmentations of those interactions. Because the reality is that from a customer from a customer workflow perspective, rarely is a customer just doing one interaction and getting their problem solved. And that could happen, but it's not necessarily the norm. And what you end up finding is that customers actually go through several steps as part of that in which they touch the enterprise, right? They may go to in this case, the example is, a customer looking to make a purchase. A customer may actually go in and do some research on the web, and so there's a bunch of data that will get captured by the web application around what that customer was looking for, what pages did they hit, what pieces of the website did they click on, and then from there the customer may, initiate a chat session, they may send an email to get more information or to try to engage with the enterprise, and then maybe at the end they make their purchase decision and they place their order through a voice call at the agent. So by pulling, in each one of these cases, they're doing what we've talked about with interactions touching multiple systems, and what ends up happening is if you can actually layer these interactions together intelligently, you can start looking at these engagements. And really that provides you a business perspective, because now you can start looking at your data in a way where you can say, what is it that customers are doing when they're coming into when they're contacting the enterprise, and what is it, what channels and what methods are they using for these different purposes. And we call that an engagement. And frankly, at the engagement level, there's a lot of very interesting insights and a lot of very interesting data that gets generated by pulling all this data together in a cogent way. And then the last thing we'll talk about is the journey. And so the journey is a very long-tailed view of a relationship with a customer. And it's built on this data hierarchy where events and transactions that are generated by the operational systems get stitched together into interactions. Those interactions get segmented into engagements. And then as a business, you can look at these engagements over a period of time to identify the steps that the customer has taken in their journey with the enterprise. And it's really, once you start understanding the journey that customers typically take with your enterprise, maybe segmented by different customer types, that you can really start to understand and start to expect what is happening with these customers, where are they in their journey, and as a result, how should you treat these customers when they're contacting your contact center. So all of this is, predicated on the fact that you have to be able to bring the data together. And so, we as a company have been thinking about this for a long time, and really, in order to really implement the hierarchy that we've talked about, you have to think about stitching the data together. And when we say stitching the data together, you really have to figure out how do I take, transactions that are happening in each one of these operational systems and link them and stitch them together contact by contact so I can create a customer interaction repository from which I can analyze interactions, create engagements, and then look at journeys. And so there's, the great thing about the contact center space is there are some very specific semantics in this data where, they're well accepted and generally used data elements in each one of these systems. And so we at Transera have spent the last several years building technology that takes these systems and takes these data elements and uses algorithms to stitch them together across these systems. And from there, that's where you can create a customer interaction repository based on which you can do a lot of this analytics. So, in and of itself, I think the hierarchy may be interesting, and creating interactions, engagements, and journeys, valuable. But the question we always get asked is, okay, well, what do I do with this? So, what are the actionable things that I can do with this data hierarchy? And so, just to give people a sense, so some of the very concrete things, tactical things that you can actually get done is delivering more interactions to the best performing answering resources. And best performing can be whatever you want it to be based on the KPIs that are important to you. So in sales environments, the KPIs that we see are order value and conversion rate and net order value and gross order value and gross conversion and net conversion. In service environments, we see things like retention, cross-sell, upsell. In support environments, we see first call resolution rates, customer satisfaction rates, and net promoter scores. And so the ability to take more of your calls and deliver them to agents that are performing the best has the potential to deliver significant benefit. And then also from there, you can actually start thinking about, well, if I know when customers or certain customer types tend to call me, I can then even adjust my staffing to make sure that I have the right agent staffed at the right time. Similarly, we do work with companies that are trying to maximize results from campaigns. And so in many cases, these companies are out there, marketing their wares across various different media, and that yields interactions in their contact center or on their website or whatever the case might be, and they're trying to figure out, well, which campaigns are actually delivering the best results, and how do I maximize and prioritize those campaigns? And there's no real way you can do that unless you can stitch the data together from the campaign data that sort of sits outside of the contact center, including all the data in the contact center around the interactions that have been generated from that campaign. And then also prioritizing, workflows that deliver the highest customer satisfaction. So there are different paths that customers take through these different systems that are deployed by the contact center, and you can actually measure the outcome of those interactions and measure which ones yielded the highest customer satisfaction for different interaction types. And so then you can, instead of making what is typically an ad hoc process of people taking the optimal path, make that a predictable process and bring that data to bear when these interactions are happening. And then the last one around cross-sell, upsell, and retention really is this idea of which offers are yielding the best results. And if you can actually tie those back to specific interactions, specific customer types, and specific workflows, you can actually start prioritizing the offers that you make for retention, cross-sell, and upsell. And again, very significant dollar benefits. Early in the presentation, we talked about those best-in-class companies that were growing 6 times faster and upselling at 3.5 times their peers. And those are the end benefits that you get from the actionable insights that interactions, engagements, and journeys provide you. So one of the other questions that we get a lot is, okay, this all sounds well and good, but why is and it obviously is something that any contact center would want to deploy, but why is this possible, and why haven't people been doing it? And the reality is that there's been a lot of innovation that's happened sort of outside of the contact center, and so people have probably heard of big data, and it's a bit of a buzzword, but the reality is there's some very fundamental core technology that's been built by the large internet properties out there, the Yahoo, Googles, and Facebooks of the world, and they originally had built for their internal purposes because they're obviously handling petabytes and petabytes of data from the web traffic that they manage. And they, I think, credit has to be given to them. They've taken those technologies and put them into the open source. And now there's an opportunity to take those technologies and apply them to different business use cases. And the contact center happens to be one that is a great fit for these technologies. And so big data allows you to actually do the things that we've talked about today. It was built for taking varied data that comes at you in high volumes at a high velocity, pull that data together, organize it in a way that allows you to aggregate the data, stitch the data together, and to run analytics against it. And so the model for big data technologically is actually very different than the BI model, right? And so the BI model has definitely delivered a lot of value on its own and has a lot of merit. But the traditional BI model is really one that's based on periodic reviews of the business based on recent performance. There's a lot of BI technologies built around summary data instead of the root data, and that summary data needs to be highly structured. And then from an analytical perspective, the queries that are run against the data in BI applications have to all be preconceived. And so there's a lot of sort of a priori design and summarization that has to happen to the data in order for BI to be an effective tool. Big data is actually quite the opposite. Big data keeps all the data. It doesn't rely on summaries. It has the ability to retain all the data. Queries are extremely flexible because the data itself is flat and not structured. And so the queries that you can make against the data are not constrained by the imagination of the person who designed the system. The queries you can make are only constrained by the imagination of the person actually making the queries. And it's also able to handle structured and unstructured data. And that's a key point, because if you think about all the different data being generated by the operational systems in a contact center, some of that data is going to be structured, some of it's going to be unstructured, some of it's going to be text, some of it's going to be potentially recordings. And so you have to think of a system and conceive of a system that can take all that data together to provide the insights that you're looking for. And so, from our perspective, all the things that we're talking about are enabled because there have been these fundamental innovations in terms of big data, and being able to leverage those technologies for the contact center has the potential to deliver very meaningful benefits. Okay, so last slide. So just a quick sort of, overview of who we are as a company. So our company name obviously is Transera. We're a privately held provider of cloud solutions based in Silicon Valley. We've been around since 2004. We have we're lucky enough to work with some market-leading companies out there, and as a result have been a profitable and rapidly growing company for the last several years. We also sort of, take credit for the fact that we have some of the largest SaaS contact center deployments in the world, global environments, thousands of agents for very well-known name brand companies. And really our focus is taking the data that's already in the contact center and using that data to drive improvement, performance improvement, and insights for operators of the contact centers. So with that, I'm done. And so Sherry, I think we can move to Q&A if there's any questions out there.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And we do have a couple questions that came in. So let's go right to the first one. And just as a reminder, for any questions, post them in the Q&A section. Okay, here's our first question. How does the customer interaction repository work differently than any other system to bring together customer data from all sorts of different sources?
Got it. That's a good question. So when we talk about a customer interaction repository, so if you think about a customer interaction repository, the one question we get asked is, well, I have a data warehouse, and so isn't that the same? Well, it is and it isn't, frankly. So data warehouses are actually very good at aggregating data. So they take data from multiple different places, and they put it in a centralized store. But the issue is the data is not linked. The data typically sits in different tables. So much of what we've talked about today is really around linking of the data. The example that I used was a call hitting an IVR system and then going to an ACD system and then having an agent work on a CRM system. Really what you need in order to get the insights that deliver the business benefits we're talking about, really what you need to know is you need to identify that call in the IVR, stitch it to that same call in the ACD, and stitch it to that same record in the CRM system where the business outcome data is. And so that linking of data across systems into single interaction records is the key differentiator between the customer interaction repository and any other data aggregation warehousing type application.
Okay, great. Let's see. Let's go to our next question. While this analysis is interesting, doesn't the real value come from taking the results from the analytics and using that data to drive the behavior of call center systems in an automated way?
That's a great question. So absolutely. So one of the things that we talk to our customers about is obviously there's value in the insights and the analytics in and of themselves, and operators of contact centers can take those insights and then obviously go out and tweak their environment in ways to optimize the environment, change how the different operational systems function in order to align better with what the data is telling them. But there is also an opportunity to take all of that information and in a closed-loop automated way actually drive the contact center infrastructure that's been deployed. And so we as a company, espouse this and do this as part of the work that we do, where effectively you have what is an intelligent recommendation engine that takes all of the analytics and in a closed-loop way drives the things that the IVR does, the routing decisions made by the ACD, the things that happen at the agent desktop level. And so all of that becomes, provides another layer of value where you can actually take a system that's learning based on the analytics and then taking those learnings and driving it into how the contact center operates on a day-to-day basis. And that closed loop has significant ability to power a contact center to improve performance.
Okay, there's some questions about the slides. Just as a reminder, to receive the slides at the end of the presentation or when you log off, a survey will come up on a separate URL. One of the questions in that survey will ask you if you'd like the slides and just place a check there. That's the best way to get them. Okay. There's a couple people here that are saying this is really interesting, but who would really champion this kind of customer interaction analytics?
Yeah. So what we see is it's typically one of three folks in the enterprise. So one, it could be the line of business owner. So typically it's a general manager who has P&L responsibility, and is one of those 93% of people that aren't satisfied with how their customer data is being used, and is one of the 85% of people that know that there's adequate customer data, but they can't get insights. And so this line of business owner is looking for these insights to better manage their business and their meet their P&L objectives. The other is the person that's responsible for customer care in the contact center. And typically this person is really focused on performance KPIs, whatever those KPIs might be, and they're looking for ways to meet and exceed those KPIs. And really their mission in life is, where is performance coming from in my contact center? I know I have all this data, but it's not telling me where I'm getting the optimal performance. And then the last type of person the last role that we've spent a lot of time with is typically folks that are in a BI analytics capacity, who are really looking to streamline their daily activities and are saying that I need a more flexible capability with regards to how I pull all this data together, how I do analytics, and so in that case, I'm looking for tools that help me get there.
Okay, now here's a question. Do you see any unique problems with linking social media customer service data into the, quote, normal call center data?
Yeah. So there definitely is, social media data, unlike traditional call center data, can be a bit more anonymous. So if you think of, a traditional Twitter a handle, it doesn't necessarily relate to a person's name or an email address or things of that nature. And so there is some work pre-work that has to be done in terms of understanding, what the social channels are that you want to emphasize and how you actually stitch together a social interaction with other call center data. So it is an emerging area. There are certain companies out there that are trying to bridge that gap. They're sort of information providers. And we've talked to some of those companies, but it's a great question. It is one of the areas that I think there's a lot of opportunity for improvement, and we're working our way through that.
Okay. With all the data being stored, does one also need data mining tools to generate insight?
Sure. Absolutely. So, there's two levels of sort of activity and value here. One is the data infrastructure and the customer interaction repository that has all this data that's stitched together into cogent interaction records. But then you need a layer of software or an application on top of that actually allows you to visualize the software, allows you to create queries, to do a bunch of things so you can actually pull up the insights. And so from our perspective, there's value at both layers. We as a company participate in both layers. And there's obviously, once you have the stitched together interaction records, there are, a number of, different ways to get at it and generate insights from it.
Is it possible to bring my web log data into this paradigm to include web visits as part of the customer engagement data?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. So the good news about most websites today is that they're very highly instrumented, and so they're capturing the click streams that are happening, the page visits that are happening, and all that data is externalized. And frankly, the online advertising space and all these companies out there that are focused on how to improve ad placement and yields from ads, they leverage that data, and they frankly take a lot of data and put it into big data stores. And so we can there's an ability to take that data and to also leverage it for the contact center. It's sort of an untapped area where not many companies are doing that today, and there's definitely a compelling opportunity to do that moving forward.
Let's see. Let's go to our next question. What are some of the cross-system key performance indicators that you're seeing people wanting to measure with this type of approach?
Sure. So it's typically, measures that combine a business outcome metric with an interaction metric. So a classic one that we see a lot is, for example, revenue per call. Right? Revenue is something that gets captured in an order entry system or a CRM system, and so that's where that revenue data lives. But if you look at, say calls, voice calls in this case, calls are captured in an ACD system or in an IVR system or whatever the call processing systems are. And so, something as simple as trying to figure out how much revenue am I generating, per call for the calls that I've taken is actually a lot of manual work today because you've got to pull the data together from all of these systems to create that simple calculation. And so that's, one classic example. The other ones are, things like retention rate calculations or first call resolution calculations or customer satisfaction calculations or order value per call calculations. All of those things require data from the different systems to be pulled together in an intelligent way so you can actually run those calculations. Today what we find is companies that do that have either made very significant specific investments in data warehousing and BI applications and have lots of very intelligent people that are doing that work, or they're living in what I call spreadsheet, a spreadsheet mess where there's a bunch of CSV files and XLS files that get pulled together on a weekly or monthly basis, and then there's some poor soul that's mashing it all together and trying to make sense of it. With an interaction record, you actually have the ability to do that in a very easy way where that calculation becomes just a couple of clicks in an application instead of all that manual work.
Okay, good. Let's see. We have another question here. How are companies using the results of this cross-system linking to improve the customer experience? Can you share what you've learned?
Sure. And, I think, to net it out, and there's a lot of different use cases here around the metrics that we've talked about, cross-sell, upsell, revenue, first call resolution, customer satisfaction. But really, if you net it out into the commonality, it's determining where performance comes from in a contact center. Right? The thing that we've found over and over again is that performance varies by answering resource and interaction type and customer type, and there's a predictable variance there. So we've looked at lots and lots of data. We've done lots and lots of modeling, and we have these things, the exploratory data analyses that we do, and what we find is there's always variance, and that variance is predictable. And so once you combine these two concepts, that there's always variance and the variance is predictable, you can quickly figure out where performance is coming from in your contact center. Because the reality today in contact centers is that the management of contacts and the distribution of contacts to specific resources is an ad hoc process. It's it's longest available agent. It's first in, first out. These are not strategies that are tied to actually where the performance comes from. And that's the value of if you try to net it out, that's the value of these analytics, which makes the optimal performance you can get from your contact center a predictable phenomenon instead of an ad hoc phenomenon.
With that much consolidation of data, are there any unique requirements for data security?
Absolutely. So a couple of thoughts here. And security obviously is something that should be taken extremely seriously. And so when you're taking data out of these operational systems and putting them into a customer interaction repository, I think we advise our customers that we should always think about which data really needs to be extracted from these systems. Because the reality is, in order to deliver the insights that we've been talking about in this presentation, you don't need to know things that are sensitive data elements from a customer perspective. You don't need to know a credit card number. You don't need to know a social security number. You don't need to really know this information. You just need to have an identifier for that customer, which can be a generic identifier. So we always advise our customers that let's carefully figure out which data you're actually putting into the cloud. To the extent that you have to push sensitive data into the cloud, we take data security very seriously and spend a lot of time securing our data centers and our infrastructure. And we actually even have a redaction process where based on our customers' requirements, we'll actually redact sensitive data. So security is important. There's not sort of one silver bullet in addressing that concern, but there are many different techniques that can be used in order to ensure the level of data security that an enterprise requires.
Okay, good. And that seems to be all the questions that we have. If you could advance to that next slide, which has all of your contact information. Sure. And there was so much information shared during these last 50 minutes or so. Let's just take 30 seconds to a minute and summarize what you think are the most important things you'd like someone to remember as they leave this, the last thing they should remember when they're leaving the webinar.
Sure. So what I'd say is it's just a handful of things. One is that every contact center is sitting on a mountain of very valuable data. And the problem out there in the world today is that it's very difficult to get relevant insights out of that data. And in the concepts that we've talked about today, there's an approach based on new technologies that are out there and based on an understanding of the underlying semantics of the data that are available in the contact center to draw those insights. And that's really the interactions, engagements, and journey concepts that we've talked about. So, I'd ask people to walk away with an understanding of that, and obviously, feel free. My contact information is on this slide. Feel free to reach out to me with regards to any follow-up questions. And then the last thing that I would say is, in addition to these insights, there's an opportunity, a very real opportunity, to impact the performance of your respective enterprises through these insights. And we're seeing it already, and I think the Aberdeen research on the front end of this deck sort of indicated that, where customers that are able to really get some insights out of the data that they have, far outperform their peers. And so this is something that's not that really has the potential to make the contact center a very strategic asset. We talk about, obviously people talk about that a lot. They're a very strategic asset for the enterprise in delivering business performance.
Perfect. Thank you, Arnab, and thanks to Transera for bringing this webcast to the CRM Exchange audience. There was lots of great educational information that came out today. As a reminder, the recording will be available in about 24 hours. We will send you all that link to the recording. And again, if for a copy of the slides, just place a check on the survey. So at this point, we will be closing this webcast down. Thank you again to Transera and everybody that worked very hard in pulling this webcast together. And, of course, thank you to everyone that attended this webcast today. Have a great afternoon.
Great. Thanks so much.